So, Dr. Christine Roman Rancy today, she's going to discuss cortical visual impairment and social skills. So we look forward to today. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And welcome to everyone who is participating today. It's really, I was thinking about this, how in previous summer institutes, it's been really wonderful to have, to be in the same room with a group of people and get to know them, fairly well over the period of a week. But this is also pretty great because we can have more people and you can kind of, I guess you can sort of pick the things that are most important for you, which reminds me that I want to say that tomorrow I'll be talking about O&M, and I have this attitude about this because I think a lot of people think O&M is only for a certain kind of child with CVI, or that it doesn't pertain to them because they don't do O&M, they're not an O&M specialist, but I think you'll be really surprised when I describe what I'm going to describe tomorrow. So that's tomorrow. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I just want to tell you, I don't have the world's greatest connection here today. So I want to talk about, this is interesting. I can't find the little thingy. There's so much stuff up here that I can't, there we go. So I want to take a little bit of time today to talk about something that too often gets overlooked when we talk about students with CVI. And when I'm talking about how CVI can actually impact social development and how do these characteristics really interfere or in some way influence social development. Okay, so I want to just mention too that if anybody has like an example or something they want to add, please, this is your session. I feel like the one benefit to being face-to-face, along with some other things, is that people are more willing to sort of speak out. But I want you to interrupt me if you have something you want to add or a question you want to ask or something you disagree with. So what is the impact here on CVI and social learning and inclusion, and why is it so critical? So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about social learning. Social learning theory, I'm going to talk about Bandura's social learning theory. It really posits that learning is a cognitive process that takes place in a social context. Hold on to that thought, because if we think that your children, our students, are not always learning at this sort of like in this straight line of direction, we see that they have these strengths and needs and that there are these kind of splinters in their learning. I just wonder if some of that can be explained because of the impact of social learning. There are 4 elements to Bandura's social learning theory, and the first one is attention. So guess what attention is triggered by? Novelty. So we have, it's interesting, how I'm going to do this. Sorry, but I always do this. That use examples from children that I see. And today, as happens very often, I had a child that we, went out into the hallway and we looked for these things that were in various positions, things that were high, things that were low, things that were new, things the child had seen, to get a whole bunch of information. But at the end of that little exercise, and now the mom is being asked to stand at the brick wall, which is far away from any doorway, and so nobody can signal the child. And the question is, how to get back to my office? Show us how to get back. There are exactly 2 turns to do this. If you're positioned a certain way, there's 1 turn, and almost no child can do that. Part of it is that the child is moving through space. I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but they're moving through space, but they're not gathering information. They're moving toward light and an open door and not much more. And they're not triggered by novelty. They don't necessarily stop on their way out the door and think, oh, look at that space. Wonder what those toys are for in the other assessment space. So when you ask them to retrace their steps, they don't have much to retrace because they didn't gather the information to start with. So if arousal is triggered by novelty, and novelty is a huge challenge for people with CVI, that's one of the issues that Bandura says contributes to social learning. Retention is another one, which is remembering and coding the information. I described that as well. Coding, this is the door we went out of. It didn't get coded. Reproduction, which is reproducing the image that's held in memory. Okay. And being able to then, act it out again. So why do so many children with CVI seem to have particular type of memory problems, for example? So this is, I'll tell a little story about this, but this is really something that parents have shared with me. They may take their child on an outing or a big vacation to someplace really exciting to their other children, like Disney World. They come back, they think they've prepared all of their children, especially their child with CVI, for what they're going to encounter. But they come back and it turns out the child with CVI seems to remember very little of it. And it's really disappointing. Well, it's probably has something to do with the fact that there is so much novelty that it's really hard for the child to even develop a visual scheme for it. So what happens is that little pieces of information are remembered here or there, but it doesn't form into a whole memory. And then socially, that can't necessarily be a shared experience because the child doesn't seem to remember it. And then finally, he says motivation, which is having a good reason to imitate. So I had this problem yesterday too about the forwarding. Let's just see what happens here. So I want to also mention then Vygotsky, who I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And he was also a social theorist who we are going to talk about. I'll bring back his concepts as we go through this presentation. But his social development theory argues that social interaction precedes development. Consciousness and cognition are the sit with that for a moment. I'm getting this message that Donna or somebody, can you tell me if I'm coming through okay? Because I keep getting messages that my thing is unstable. Am I okay?
So you are, we lost your last sentence of, you were making a point about, I believe Vygotsky and something that he said, and then.
Okay, I'm going to switch one more time to a different network. So if you lose me for a moment, don't worry, I'll be back. I'm just gonna switch because this is ridiculous. This is my problem, it's my problem because I'm in the hospital, but yesterday it was A-okay, but today it might not be.
Well, it's the storms as well. We're having a lot of storms in the area probably, so.
All right. Okay, I should be back now, right?
Yes.
Okay, this should work. All right, so again, I was saying to sort of sit with the thought that according to Vygotsky, social interaction precedes development. Consciousness and cognition are the end product of socialization and social behavior. As we go through this, I want you to hold in your mind, you're going to see a lot of examples of a child or two or three that are able to walk and talk. But I want you to know that this presentation applies equally to children who are not able to do those things. And that the child who's sitting, in a positioning seat, a wheelchair, or even a beanbag chair in a classroom, these are the children I'm speaking to because I worry about them the most, okay? So Vygotsky's really famous work was around the zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development is the distance between a student's ability to perform a task under adult guidance or with peer collaboration and the student's ability solving the problem independently. So somewhere between full support and full independence is the zone of proximal development. And that's where learning happens. That's where learning happens. So every time, you know, somebody on the educational team takes that child's hand over hand, and shoves it onto some target, they are not giving the child any opportunity to get past the most outer ring of the zone of proximal development. They're not helping that child. They're not facilitating learning. There is no learning in that situation. I don't know if I can really say this with enough emphasis, but and everyone who knows me knows I am a nerd, but I do really think about this a lot, because when I am about to help a child, I literally, consciously, intentionally pull back for a moment, just to see if the child can solve the problem themselves. And that's not very easy for most of us who work with children who have special needs. It is a choice you make. It's a choice you make. And then, we either see the child progress and celebrate their own self-determination and their own successes, or we don't. And what really is I've had a long day already, so I'm going to get a little lectury. I apologize already. But what I want to say is that I've heard so many professionals say this child just needs to learn to be more independent. The truth is, the adult needs to learn this. They need to learn how to make that happen. So I originally did this for people who would have no idea what mainstreaming and inclusion is, but I'm sure all the people on this Zoom do. And so, we have to, one of the things I think is really critical, first of all, is to embrace the family's wishes regarding these two things, right? So let me just say, for mainstreaming is really that you spend some time in the day in doing some activities with peers that don't have challenges. But inclusion is you are fully in the mainstream, you're fully in the regular ed classroom and that's a very different decision. And that is a decision, I just want to say, whether we decide whether a child spends some time outside of their special ed classroom or whether they spend no time in a special ed classroom, it is my passionate belief that that is led by the parent. And it doesn't matter whether we agree or not with that choice. It does not matter at all. It is somebody else's decision. Now, I hope in the best case scenario, it's a team decision where we all make this decision together on behalf of the best outcome for the child. This is my friend Matthew, and he was an example of this. Is he was mainstreamed. He is now out of school. He graduated, and Matthew was in a special ed homeroom and had some of his classes were in a special ed homeroom. But he really enjoyed the time he spent in the high school classes, and before that, middle school and elementary. He always had a paraprofessional who went with him. To the classes, and he used an iPad to have to mirror what was being put on the whiteboard. So he had this nice connection to see what was going on. The paraprofessional would help guide him a bit. And during this time, some of you know this story, Matthew I watched him answer questions in a world history class about World War II, the Pacific Theater in particular. Matthew has spastic quadriplegia. He has his expressive communication is really difficult, and he actually uses no AAC, which is interesting. That's another story. I watched him use the iPad and answer every single question that was asked of the general class correctly about World War II. Things that actually gave me pause for a minute, I had to think about. After that was over, he went back to his homeroom class, his special ed class, where he was assisted into a stander, and he was asked to sort blocks by color. That's very disturbing to me. And so we think of when we need to, really remember that these things of mainstreaming and inclusion are not the same, and they come with really different benefits and challenges. By the way, that was the last day he ever spent in special ed. How does CVI impact social development in all settings? Well, these characteristics don't go away when you're in a social setting, that it affects mostly your interactions with peers and to a lesser degree with adults as well. So here we go. Let's talk about some of the risks by characteristic. So, everything I do is pretty much framed in these characteristics. So we'll go through these more in depth, but if we think about complexity, well, it starts with the child's inability to discriminate faces. That would surely impact your social development. The great difficulty learning from imitation because of distance and novelty and latency. Just watching somebody do something is not really an efficient or even accessible way for many people with CVI to learn. And yet, how many of us learn really readily through imitation? Has YouTube changed the way you do many things? Has YouTube taught you novel skills you wouldn't have had before? That's imitation. The ability to efficiently interact with new materials because of novelty. Kids get out a board game, it's a brand new game to the classroom, and the person with CVI just kind of bails out. I don't know what this is. Busy or unfamiliar environments cannot be easily understood or safely negotiated because of both complexity and novelty, and activities that occur at a distance are often missed. So let's look at these faces. So this could almost be a presentation unto itself. I have to say that in my experience, I don't think I've met the child yet or the student who really can fully discriminate a human face, right? That there are lots of kids with CVI who can establish eye contact. And so for anyone who's not a parent or doesn't have a vision background or even does, please remember that eye contact is really just eye contact, and that it doesn't change the ability for that person. It doesn't equate to knowing who a person really is. And so a lot of compensatory skills are used there. So I had an experience with one of the children you'll see repeatedly in this presentation named Jim, and he was on the playground at his school, and there were little centers set up at the playground. And Jim he walked over with his one-on-one aide to where one girl was building a tower of blocks, and they were big outdoor blocks, and she was real proud of her blocks. And Jim walked over and he just knocked them over. And he was so delighted with himself. And the little girl had an expression of horror on her face, like, what did you just do? But Jim didn't read that expression. He could not read that expression. He couldn't access the face that can be seen but cannot be really understood. It's not because of an autism issue, by the way. This is an access issue. I don't really perceive that. So the little girl built the blocks back up again, a little more cautiously, keeping her eye on Jim. As soon as she got them tall again, he knocked him over again. And I whispered to the little girl, I said, you can tell him not to do that. You can ask him to not do that. And she looked at him, looked at his paraprofessional, and then got up and walked away. So both the presence of this adult that looks like a bodyguard, you know what I mean? It's, these children don't understand why you always have another adult with you all the time. So what is this person like? You're the police person for Jim? Why? And she decided it was just better to bail. And an entire social possibility was lost. And it was lost because Jim could not perceive what that child was communicating through her face. So I also want to say this is true of things like photos of family members, that many children with CVI use non-facial details to recognize those photos. I have been in attendance at a number of IEP meetings or team meetings where people will say, we can cross that one off the list. She recognizes every person in her class. We've tested it out. And I'll say, can we change the picture of Sarah? Can we change it? We'll change that picture and put a different shirt on her. Let's see if she's still around. Let's put her hair up in a ponytail now instead. Let's take her glasses off. And doesn't work. All right, so this interaction is possible, by the way. This interaction of eye-to-eye contact is possible. However, in the lives of many very young children with CVI, that is often not easy. But imagine what happens here when a child doesn't make eye contact, when that doesn't happen. We're starting to have these red flags or risks start to occur that people might think there's something else going on, right? So this is a picture that, a photograph that I really like, because, life is full of texture. Life is full of social texture. This texture is sometimes smooth, sometimes bumpy, sometimes serious, sometimes silly, but it all adds to our schemes of human beings, right? And it also helps us make choices about who we want to be with. Like, I want to be with this guy. And this happened. This is the sibling of a child who was being evaluated. And this sibling was getting bored, and I think probably noticed that, his brother was getting virtually all the attention. So he just quietly went over to the table and found a piece of tape, put it on his mouth, and put the balloon on his head. Clearly it was attention-seeking behavior, and it worked. It worked. First of all, how would he have known that was funny? How would he have ever known that was funny? He picked that up incidentally somewhere, right? We hope. And he also used this mechanism to gain attention. And part of the texture of his social life was that he knew how to bring people to him. So I think this is really, really an interesting picture. And I also see this kind of thing in more siblings of kids of children with CVI. Their siblings who will do kind of not even outrageous, but do unusual things to help remind the family, like, hey, we're here too, But it's a really interesting thing. Does this matter that the child with CVI see this? Because, by the way, his brother did not. Does it matter? Will he be a smarter, better person because of it? That's a judgment, you make for yourself. I think it matters. All right, I'm going to show you, this next video I'm going to show you, this video I'd like to show you is one that is of a boy who is at a lunchtime gathering. He's in his school, it's lunchtime, and he does not really benefit from the people around him. Their faces, he does not recognize their faces, though they're with him all day, every day, one way or the other. And so watch how he goes about having his lunch. Just watch it, and then we'll talk about it for a moment. Wait, really good thing. Hey, Mason. No, this is Sean's. Where's your juice? Yeah, this is Sean's. Find your drink. Trash can. You have juice. Or. All of the entirety of it. I think he's looking for entirety. so what do you notice about this environment, first of all? Let's just start with, do you see Mason ever regard a person's face, whether it was the adult who moved his drink, the child next to him whose drink he accidentally took? Do you see any addressing of another person there? Probably not. He is actually, notice how it's interesting when we think about yesterday when we talked about sensory balance and how the senses can take turns in the lead. Well, we can see that tactual was definitely the lead here, right? People have watched this video and said, is he blind? Because he really is functioning like a child who's relying so much on his tactual sense. This is supposed to, I mean, if the goal here is to have a social gathering called lunch and to eat, that's a goal, and to be with your friends, your peers, there are a lot of things that could have been done, I think, a little bit more helpfully here. So we would want to make sure, first of all, that we told Mason, who was sitting next to him on either side, what grown-ups were there to help him if he needed it. Maybe to find a way to kind of better define his lunch space so that he didn't overreach past his drink and take his friends. And also, when he took his friend's drink, there was an opportunity, right, to have an interaction with that child to say, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to take your drink. Or here's your drink back. So this inability to really interpret faces results in this boy looking, some people have said blind, some people have said autistic, and he's neither. But this is what CVI looks like. So this is, again, a complete missed opportunity for social interaction. It's just completely missed. I'm not blaming anyone for this. I'm saying that all of us could probably do better with this if that's one of your goals. I'm going to also just interject right here that I think any IEP worth signing is one that includes social goals, goals for social development, self-determination within an IEP. I just don't know why this is not also a really critical issue. So let's look at how, so we may be really sort of confused sometimes because we think, well, you're looking at that face, or you always recognize me even if I'm not talking. How can you do that? Well, again, I can look at your face. And I can often tell who you are, even without all the information, but the subtle pieces are going to be gone. My ability to know that you just winked at me or that you just made brief eye contact with me to tell me, come on over here. So if we look at these, you'll see that these are faces of famous people, and you can tell who they are because most of them have salient features that are able to be seen even when the image is degraded. Right? So take a moment because I know you're not listening to me because you're just trying to figure out who these people are. Okay, so if I said to you, we'll do a recognition task. If I said to you, one of these people, what number is Prince Charles? Got it? What number is Goldie Hawn? What number is, here's one that's a little harder, Tom Hanks. And one that's much easier, Cher. So these people, if you notice the people that are easier kind of have salient features. Number 2 is pretty clear. They have salient features that emerge even when some of the parts of the face are not available. I want to make sure I say, though, that these are not images that are meant to describe the way a person with CVI sees your face. I don't think anybody has been able to really do that properly yet. But we do know that the face appears degraded in some way, okay? When I test this at Pediatric View, I will put out images of faces, and the faces are of people, grown-up people, children, babies, people of different, skin tone, different, ethnicity. And I will ask the child, show me a girl. show me all the girls. Now, by the way, this task is no longer considered appropriate because it sort of reveals a gender bias. So know that if you're not comfortable doing this, or people in your sphere are not comfortable with you doing this, there's another way you can do it as well. And so what I also sometimes do is I have two images of this face. Do you see my cursor? Can someone tell me yes or no? Do you see my cursor? Yes? Can someone speak to me?
Yes, I see your cursor.
Thank you. Okay. So so I have two views of this face, for example, and they're quite different views, but it's undeniable they're the same person. So I'll ask someone, show me the twins, find the twins for me. And that then becomes a really big task. Now, not all children can participate in this activity, and not children who are in phase one of any, level of understanding about language or what I'm asking for in the task, but quite a few children can. And so, if the child can't handle the array, I'll just show them to them one at a time. Okay. And sometimes it works better if I say, is this person, more like a mom or a dad? Is this person more like your sister or your brother? That kind of thing. Whatever I can do to get at it. But we'll see that people who have a little more ambiguous image, it becomes really challenging. Okay. I am not, by the way, I have to say too that you cannot teach a person. So I would ask you not to try to drill a child to better interpret a human face, because it is not teachable. It will happen, if it can happen, as a reflection of the overall CBI range score. But as I said before, I have never yet met the person with CBI who fully discriminates a face. So remember, it's different than knowing who somebody is. Right? So this person on the left, at the top left, has a lot of salient features, right? I wouldn't probably confuse this person with this person, right? But if this person at the top left with the long black hair had her hair pulled up and was wearing like a floppy hat, would I still know it was her? Okay. So some of you have seen this. Yes.
There is a question.
Perfect.
The question is, every year at the beginning of school, we request for pictures of teachers, staff, and peers. Can having this on an IEP to support socialization be considered an accommodation?
Having what on an IEP?
I guess the request for these photos of people working with
I don't know what that was.
Me neither, but it sounded great, I guess. So when you're asking for pictures from the team, is that an accommodation? Would you say that I would, as a parent, I would like these pictures of whoever will be in my child's life? Is that an accommodation?
I don't think so. I think it's a material, right? Those are materials. The accommodation would be to teach the salient features of a person's appearance, if there are any salient features, right? Because are glasses really a salient feature? Only if the person wears the exact same glasses all the time. I mean, all the time. So this is a great question, because this is a very common thing, especially in special ed programs, where they'll have, let's talk in morning meeting about who's here today, and they have photographs of people, and it's not wrong to use a photograph. But please understand the limitations of that, which are that if I'm saying, Sally has on a blue sweater and Joe has on, a striped shirt, that's probably how that child with CBI is memorizing who these people are. That's probably how they are. And so you can use it, but don't fool yourself. We shouldn't be confused about the fact that this child really understands who these people are. They get them all right in morning meeting. Who's here today? Are you here? Get your picture, put it on the board. Yay, that's good. But now we're in a real life situation in which the child's across the room getting a drink at the sink, and the child with CVI looks across the room, if they can see that far, do you think they know who that person is without the person speaking? It's not for sure. We can't be sure they do. And even more importantly, if they turn and make eye contact with that person with CVI, will that be read at all? And if they sort of give a smile while making eye contact and what they're saying is, come join me, that might be missed altogether. So there's so much harm that can be done if we make assumptions about what the child's accessing and what they're not, because we will then start to look for other answers, other explanations. Well, she knows all her classmates because she knows, this little boy eating lunch, he knows all his classmates because he can always pick out the right picture in morning meeting. But does he? Because he doesn't seem to regard them at all during lunch, because it's not a photograph, it's real life. So I think we just don't want to do more harm by making assumptions that way. This is a really common mistake, So, and then, we have a talker with images on them of all the people that are important in somebody's life. For, an AAC device, I'm not saying don't use those pictures. I'm not saying that. But just understand that the person with long blonde hair might be mom. And if there's another person with long blonde hair and that button is positioned pretty close to mom, that person might also be mom. Okay? And that's not because they're too cognitively impaired to know the difference. It's vision. This is vision. Okay? So there's some videos in here I know some of you have seen before, and I apologize for that, but I really, honestly, I think there's always so much to be learned by watching this. So this is my friend Griffin, and he is much older than this now, but he is at home getting some private speech therapy. This is his speech therapist with him, and she's there to facilitate social language. And so Griffin is in his home, and somebody has entered his kitchen, but this person changed from the last time he saw her. And she now has short hair and changed the color of her hair. And Griffin is a child who is able to read just fine. He reads well, can't always interpret the images, however. He has a lot of really important skills. Can use a cane quite well. He's pretty skillful. But watch this. But when you don't know something, instead of avoiding it, what should you do?
How could you find out who that person is? Does it not look like a familiar person to you?
His mother is also present, but you'll only hear her voice.
It does. He or she does? Is it a boy or a girl? A girl? Who is it?
I don't know.
Well, if she looks familiar, who does she look like?
I don't know.
What could you do to get a better look?
How are you going to see her if... Anybody you know? It's nobody that you know? Well, maybe you might want to find out from your mom, or you could ask the person, excuse me, but what is your name? And why are you in my house? Obviously the person's safe because your mom is here, right? Okay. So go see if you can figure out who that person is.
Anyway, who is that person? I would like you to be able to talk to that person and find out.
Yeah.
No.
Are they a safe person?
They are a safe person.
They are somebody that you know?
It's somebody I know, so they are.
Okay, at this point, I just want to say, I think these questions are a bit excessive, and I think they would admit they are as well. But, when you video yourself, it's not always exactly the way you want it to be. I also want to point out that, as Griffin did not look in the direction of where you would think his mother's face is. He sort of looks over to the side. So even this child who's quite talented, that faces are still really hard. Okay, let me see if I can
To talk to. Instead of going through me, I would like you to talk to them directly. You're a big boy. You're almost, what are you, almost 8?
Yeah. Is this somebody you've known for a long time, Alicia?
Yeah, I've known for quite some time. I trust them in my house without me being here.
Does Griffin know this person?
Yes, you have met this person. You know this person.
Oh, does Griffin see this person very frequently?
Yeah, Griffin sees this person pretty frequently.
Okay, so let's see if you can figure this out, Griffin. It's a person that you know, your mom knows. Actually, I know this person. I've seen her frequently. And in all honesty, she is always here on a Friday. Yeah, how do you know that that's Rebecca?
I don't know, but I think she kind of has like a different hairstyle.
There you go. See, how different is her hair?
So is it that you normally know Rebecca by her hair?
I don't know Rebecca, but I don't know.
You normally
So he doesn't even really know. He knows that her hair is how he sort of recognizes her. But we have to, we have to keep in mind that when you are the person looking out and your brain and your vision and your perception of the world is what it is, it's hard to unwind that and compare it to somebody who doesn't have CVI. So he's struggling because he doesn't quite even know why they're asking this, because this is how he sees the world. So this person was then it was a very elusive, difficult challenge for him. How did he know? He knew because this person's always here on Friday. That's called a compensatory skill, right? He's using the structure, the framework of schedule to know who most likely could be there. So you can see how that would be really off-putting and frustrating and sometimes embarrassing. So imitation, let's talk about how imitation, we've talked, and the social theorists talk about imitation as a way of watching somebody else do something helps us learn lots of social behaviors. And so imitation, it's interesting because social behaviors are also really, really cultural, right? They're really cultural. I was raised in Detroit. My husband was raised in a little town in Appalachia. And honestly, we have really, really different points of view about lots of social behaviors, We both went to Catholic school, but I don't understand why he didn't get taught manners. We would have had our hands slapped. It's a very big deal. This social thing sets you up. So if he would have stayed in his community, nobody would have ever said anything about whether he put a napkin in his lap, right? But that's context. That's context. And for our students, their family and their classrooms are a big part of their community. And I just don't want to see kids have to be kind of ejected or separated from their community like Mason was. So imitation is a way that we learn so much. And so children, learn group games and turn taking and subtle social behaviors, like if somebody gives you a thumbs up, that means that's good, right? Or yes. How did you learn not to put crayons in your mouth? Well, nobody probably taught you directly, but you watched what people did with crayons, and they mostly didn't put them in their mouth. Mealtime rituals, all the unspoken elements. This is culture. This is our culture. These are our standard ways of behaving. I know one child told me, I know to raise my hand to ask a question, but no one ever told me to put it back down. So he's just sitting there with his hand up forever. And pretty soon the kids start looking at him and smiling and rolling their eyes. He doesn't see that either. So he doesn't know until finally somebody told him, actually, once the teacher calls on someone, you put your hand down. Imitation taught all the other children. It's used by infants to elicit and begin turn taking. So tiny babies, actually begin to use imitation to create this dance between a parent and a child. And a dance it is. However, for children with CVI, does not happen spontaneously until a child's in phase 3, and then it might not happen either. Because if something's too far away, there's too much clutter, there's too much noise, that person's not going to learn from imitation either. So a baby learns it almost immediately. A person with CVI has to wait a long, long, long time and maybe only can imitate under very special circumstances. So what is lost? So this is what is lost. So we see this is a pretty famous clinical experiment about that really had to do with who starts the interaction. Does the child imitate the parent, or does the parent imitate the child? And it turns out the parent imitates the child. And then the baby continues that interaction. And what are they learning by that? They're learning a bunch. They're learning they have agency. You know, I have a little control here. I can do something and make something happen, and I can start the music. We can dance together. What if that doesn't happen? Not only does the child not feel like they have much control, but they also don't have all that approval that happens through the face of like, yes, that's adorable. Let's do that again. You're so smart. Sticking out your tongue like that. And the parent also sometimes feels as though they're the broken one. That this child would do this if only I could do something a little better. And that's really a challenge. That's not the issue. So according to Arabian,
Kelia is a big thing now.
Somebody likes country music. Only 7% of emotional meaning is conveyed in the actual words we speak. 55% is through facial expression and body language, and 38% is tone of voice. 55% has to be seen. 55% has to be seen. How can we not address this in our students when we know they're so at risk to have social challenges? And again, it's not just kids like Griffin who can actually explain the way he's thinking things are happening. Wonderful. What about that child who's nonverbal? Do you think they ever, come on. Do you think they ever feel alone, lonely, isolated? I bet they do. So again, we'll talk about this texture of, the texture of our social lives. Does it really matter that this child learned to clasp his hands behind his back and walk behind these guys? Yeah, actually, I think it does. Because what it's doing is it's teaching this child something about what happens when people sort of are in thought or sharing a moment. This is a really old picture because you see this child has some kind of phone that probably had to be charged on a charger but this, what children are doing, they don't really care about making a call. They want to just do what you do. And so vision gives them that. Vision gives them the opportunity to see what you're doing and then to learn that. And by the way, when a child does this enough, I think most of you know I'm also a child developmental specialist, that when they see this enough, they begin to hold visual schemes in their brain. These visual schemes become bigger and deeper and broader and paint pictures that they hold in their mind of how certain things occur. So this child won't mind too much if they're in a new environment, as long as they look around and they think, oh, this is a kitchen also. I get it. Why does the student with CVI so resist change? Because they have not built those visual schemes that give them that reference point and that comparative thought to say, okay, I can do this. It's not exactly the same, but mostly the same, right? Again, some things are just adding to the texture of your social life, learning about all kinds of things, including things that won't matter to some people, but enrich the way you see things and see the world. This child is studying this cat and won't confuse this cat, for a frog. likely. Here's my friend Jim, and this was a really big moment when his mom was doing the Itsy Bitsy Spider with him, and he attempted to imitate it in some way. That's a very big deal. So imitation examples. So remember, as I said, it's the fuel for representational play. How do you pretend play if you don't watch these routines and store these movies in your brain? If you don't have the movies stored, you're not going to play them out. And so we think sometimes that children with CVI and other children with visual impairment may have delayed cognition because representational play is one of the big milestones for cognition or cognitive delay. But we can't judge that for a person who has CVI, because first you have to be able to store all of this visual imagery before you can play it out. It's also the fuel for things like learning to eat. It's a pretty basic thing. The number of children with CVI and all visual impairment, I will add, who have eating issues is huge. Most babies don't need to eat table food when they do, but they're so intrigued by what they see that they want to imitate it. Okay, so imitation is a very big deal. I'm going to pass that. So now let's talk about novelty. Wait, I'm going to go back to this picture. This really
Christine?
scary. Yes.
We have a couple of questions.
Okay, good. I'll just stop on Jim here.
So I think Becky's going to answer this one, but I'm trying to find where to start here. So,
Okay.
Can children with CVI demonstrate selective recognition of faces and expressions? In my support group, I have often heard some parents sharing that their children cannot identify the color of people's eyes. Why would this be?
Well, that's a pretty significant detail. You have to have a lot of ventral stream vision, detail vision, to be able to actually isolate that part of the face. We also want to know if the child is able, how the question is asked of the child. So if the child, if you're asking the child, what color is this person's eyes? That's a really hard question. But if you say, is this person, do they have blue eyes? Do they have green eyes? That's different, because now you're giving them that information and they can just confirm or deny. But it also has everything to do with the CVI range score, because you wouldn't expect someone with CVI to be able to isolate that in real time in a moving face very easily. So I would be more surprised when the child could actually recognize it. And sometimes they'll know the color of someone's eyes because somebody told them and they remembered. Does that answer that? Does that help?
Yes, and I'm wondering, so someone also is asking to have a brief discussion on pretend play.
Okay.
Maybe that imitation and also that experience and how important that is.
Okay, so, all right, well, that takes me to this picture. And so I want to say something about, there's a difference between representational play and pretend play, right? So pretend play can be something that is memorized, which is that's his strength. He will memorize something that has been read to him. He's very, very, very language enriched, probably his vocabulary 3 times mine. And he becomes so fascinated and enriched by this fantasy story that he is not real clear about the fact that it's not a real thing. That's different than representational play, which means not only can I play out what I've seen, but I could take a pencil and pretend it's a train. because that's true representational play where you have an object that represents something else and play it out. Pretend play can be a problem. It's a problem if it's the place the child goes for an inordinate amount of time, because it becomes the imagery that is more important and more dominant than the reality of what's around them, but it's more accessible because there's no right or wrong, right? So I can tell you, if I look around this room that I'm in right now, if I were to look at the sink down, there's a sink in this room. If I were to say, orange juice comes out of that sink because it's Willy Wonka's office and I'm Willy Wonka, and that would not be true. That would not be true. And it would be very important for someone to say to me, oh, that would be fun if that could really happen, but that's a pretend idea. Orange juice might come out of a container at a hotel where you're getting orange juice out of a big help me with my words, but you see what I'm saying? It's a very fine line, and so it's important. One of the things I recommend is that parents, when they're reading to their children, that they read to them both stories that are fantasy and also even more often, stories about real life, real kids, real activities. So they can begin to experience and hold in their visual scheme what is. Because you see, that's not accessible to them. The fantasy for them is almost more accessible. Okay. Now, if a child has, really, really complex needs and, we're not able to efficiently communicate with them for whatever reason, that's also, we should be very concerned about their point of view about what reality is. And if they have something like that they love to watch on their iPad, for example, every day, or something that they gravitate to over and over that is not based in reality, we have to really make sure we explain to them, yeah, this is really fun, but a chipmunk can't really drive a car, right? It's really important. And it's a glitch that is all too common, and we as adults think it's adorable and we play into it far too much. So Jim he's a spaceman here, and that's his rocket ship behind him. And I'm happy to play along with him. And then I'm going to alternate that with something about, let's talk about, what kids do with a ball, that kind of thing. So it's really a big job. It's a big job. Did that answer the question? Is there more to that you'd like to ask?
No, I think that's perfect. There's another question.
Okay.
How do you give CVI students experiences in a new environment? How can we help with that student?
Well, we're right here at Novelty. So, and also, I think honestly, and I'm not trying to push my O&M thing tomorrow, but I am, that I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, because novel environments are a very, very, very big part of O&M. How on earth do you help with that? And so one of the ways to always try to evaluate a child is to make sure you see them in a setting that's not just their familiar space, because their response to the novel space will be so very different. So that's a big deal. And we're going to cover that pretty significantly tomorrow, if that's okay. Is that acceptable, Donna?
Of course. And for those who don't know, O&M stands for Orientation and Mobility.
Mm-hmm. And it's not just for children who can walk and use a cane. I'm going to talk a lot about children with really complex needs. All right, so novelty is attention directed to the most. Was there another question? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to plow ahead.
Keep going, we're good.
Attention is directed to the most discrepant target in individuals without CVI. So those of you who know what the teller cards are, the striped cards that help us determine acuity in someone who isn't able to read a traditional Snellen chart. That was actually part of the idea of these researchers, Fonts and Fagan, who taught us that if you present a novel pattern to a baby, they're really forced to look at it. Forced choice, preferential looking. They have no choice. They're looking. But that's certainly not, not the case for kids with CVI. And if the world is filled with so much novelty that a new target is not discrepant, and that's the issue. If everything is novel at Disney World, for example, then nothing is salient. For kids with CVI, without CVI, they look at that same environment. They say, I can define. I know the salient features. I got it. Whoa, what's that? And that's the novel thing. But for kids with CVI, it's all novel. So there's no reason that something new should pop out. It's fascinating. Today, I gave this child this little toy that had these sort of light up eggs that go in and things you can do with them. And he got the first row. He never even noticed there was a row behind it. That's novelty. He had never seen this toy before. So it's kind of fascinating to think that your brain can actually not see something. But that's what happens. Novelty issues may result in the individual appearing to be disinterested. Actually, it's access. So what happens in a classroom? Oh, let's just talk about like show and tell day. Oh, that's big fun. Everybody comes in, brings in something from home, most of which the child with CVI has never seen before, and they turn their back and want to look the other way, or they just hum to themselves, or they don't even look at all. And what happens is, their one-on-one turns them around and says, come on, we're doing this now. Like, use your eyes and look at that. I'm looking. I don't know what that is. Teaching salient features is the way, of course, that we can help unlock the difficulties with novel information. And so in this next video, I would like you to look at this situation in which Griffin is in a novel setting. And I'm just going to say this and say it over and over again. Even though Griffin is not maybe like all the kids that you work with, I want you to recognize that he is teaching us a lot about what children who can't speak up for themselves would teach us. And we must apply this as we know it to all children. One of my passionate goals is to try to make sure that kids with CVI don't feel isolated, because I think way too often they do. Griffin is on a playground, you'll see next, and he doesn't know this playground. He is specifically taken to this new playground where he doesn't know any of the children. So their voices don't matter because he's never met them before. There's new equipment. He doesn't know the equipment too much. Mm-hmm. And he's there with his sister, his grandma, his mom. And his sister she's already taken off. Griffin tried to follow her for a bit. She's younger. And she, Jocelyn is her name, and she ditches him. She's just doing her own thing. So Griffin finds his way over to the swings, and he's waiting for one of the swings to be vacated. Here's the characteristic of latency at the bottom of this list, and he doesn't get on the swing fast enough before another child gets there before him. It just slays me. He finds the swings because they move. Okay, he finds the swings because they're at least not so novel, right? He can't keep up with his sister because of distance viewing, so he doesn't know, and the complexity of that environment, people's faces, the noise, all too much. Here is that situation where everything is novel except maybe those swings. So let's watch what happens here.
Because it's a park and you don't have a specific. They're not a specific size swings to anyone.
What did you say again? What?
Ashley needs children who she doesn't even know until she tells really not used to these types of children.
What?
I'm not used to these types of children.
Okay. If that doesn't just put a knife in your heart. So he says that he's upset because he doesn't understand why. And I want you to tell me why. You know what, Donna, or anybody, if you want to just tell me what responses are in the chat, because I'm going to ask people to put something in the chat. I want you to think about why he says that his sister goes up to these children that she doesn't know and she totally makes friends with them, and I totally don't make friends with them. What is it about his CVI that is the interfering thing? Why does Jocelyn, why can she, and why can't Griffin? So take a moment, and if you can put, your thought about that in the chat, and then Donna, when you get a few things there, if you would let me know.
All right, we have a few things already, and I apologize if you all hear my dogs grumbling.
That's okay. Oh, the storm.
Grumbly, yes.
Oh boy.
So we have some responses that say faces, novelty, complexity. His sister picks up on social cues, like smiling, novelty. Yes. She is able to read the nonverbal social cues. He is not.
Yeah.
His sister.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. His sister can what?
Can successfully integrate all the sensory experiences at once and is able to then initiate interactions.
Okay. All right. So the thing is here is that his sister sees a child, maybe goes to a piece of equipment, sees a child, that child regards her, she looks back at them, and through their eyes and maybe through facial expression, they communicate that, yeah, you're welcome here. I'd like to have you approach. And she responds back without a word, yes, I'd like to approach. Griffin can't do that. Think about the child in the classroom in that seated position or in that stander who cannot move themselves. It's a little better if they're in some kind of mobility device, but they can't move themselves. They don't capture anybody's eye contact. Somebody walks past them and they may move themselves a little bit to try to indicate, are you there? Who is that? But they don't make eye contact and people just keep moving right past them. And so people assume that they're not interested because they're not providing those social cues that say, come here, I need you, I want something. Devastating. It just breaks my heart. And then he says, I'm not used to these types of children, which is at once just about the most beautiful and telling thing ever, and also heartbreaking at the same time. So there's a characteristic that accounts for why he's not used to these types of children, and that's novelty, right? He doesn't know anything about them, doesn't have any salient anything about them, including their voice. So he's lost at sea. Individuals with CVI have a significant reduction in gathering incidental information. This greatly reduces the opportunities to expand their visual representations of the world and to compare new learning to previous learning. Repetition or exposure to an object, event, image, or environment does not correlate with learning. It's just exposure. So this is where a mediated experience has to occur. And you know what's fascinating to me is that again, I'll talk about this tomorrow, but a lot of kids are denied O&M services because people will say, well, they know this building, they know this classroom, they know the hallway. But if you were to show them pictures on an iPad and say, show me the things that you would see on your way in your power chair from your classroom to where you get on the bus, show me the ones that you see. You would be shocked at what they have never, ever, ever noticed. Shocked. Okay. So I want to show you another video, and this is incidental learning. that is, again, this is Griffin again. It's just so nice of his mom to share these videos with us because they're not really easy, really, to watch. And this one's especially difficult. And so I'm going to just warn you right now. This is a photograph that Griffin's grandfather took in the backyard of a fawn sleeping under a tree. And he took a picture from a distance and then took it in and showed it to Griffin's sister and brother. And they were, impressed and excited. And then it was shown to Griffin. Now, Griffin is not at his own home. He's playing Minecraft, whatever that is. And he's fine with his own little world and his own little game. But his dad wants him to identify what this picture is. And so, again, being able to understand the salient features of something in a context, especially in this complex image, is really hard. So let's watch a little bit of this.
Griffin, hold this. Tell me what that is in that picture. Well, no, that is not an option to sit there and say, I don't know. Look at the picture. Well, look at the picture. You can zoom in on it. Look at the picture and tell me what it is.
Okay, so first you see refusal, right? Refusal. What you're going to see is behavior, because of course these are his parents, so they always get the worst of it, right? But you're going to see behavior, refusal. You're going to see him act out. You're going to see him vocalize his great discontent. He's going to seem very, 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 very unwilling. You'll also hear in the background in a moment, you'll hear Griffin's mom prompt Griffin's dad by saying, tell him the salient features. So the dad does. And once he finally gets sort of close to the answer, they ask him for even more. And that becomes almost over the top. I don't know.
Look at it. Take some guesses. Take some guesses as to what the
Chipmunk.
A chipmunk, okay? No, it's not.
Okay, this is a chipmunk is a pretty good guess, right? It's because the chipmunk has white spots, is brown, has sort of funny little pointed ears. That would have been a great moment to pivot and say, use comparative language and say, well, it's like a chipmunk. That's a pretty good guess because, blah, 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 but it's different. This isn't a chipmunk because this is bigger and it blah, give him more salient features. But his dad's not, he's not an educator. He's not sure that's the right thing to do, but that would have been, as an educator, our moment to pivot right there.
Chipmunk here, hold on. Hold on here, I'm gonna zoom it up a little bit. There you go, look at it now. Well, look at me. Here, let's take this. Let's take this out of the way. Let's look at the salient features of it and see if we can figure out what it is. Hold the phone. Griffin, hold the phone. Jossie, move.
So come up with what you think is very different, no matter what is always the same. Come up with a couple different things. You, Colin, say notice the whatever.
Notice that it has, let's look at it together. Stop. Let's look at it together. Notice that it has spots on it. What are you doing? Look at it. What color is it, first off? Let's look at the color of it. Yeah, come here, let's look at it this way. Let me get a little picture. There. Let's zoom in. I'll zoom in for you. Look. Look at it. What color is it? It's tan. What do we know that's tan?
Deer.
Okay, does it look like the size of a deer?
No.
So it looks like it wouldn't be an adult deer?
No.
So maybe what could it be?
A baby deer.
You think it looks like a baby deer?
Yes.
Why would it look like a baby deer now?
Oh.
Why would it look like a baby deer?
Yeah, what it makes it deer like baby deer.
Griffin, hey, Griffin and not answering the question is not an option.
What details about it make it baby deer like?
Well, take a look at it and tell us. We're done after this.
Think about Bambi. How do you know Bambi?
Griffin, that is not appropriate. If you would like to play Minecraft, please answer the questions.
There you go.
Hold the phone first. 1. Okay, so what features of it make it look like a baby deer? I will count to 3. One. The face! The face, what else?
Okay, that's 2 minutes and 42 seconds. 2 minutes and 42 seconds, and he's still working on, very reluctantly, still working on what that could be. I mean, he knows it's a deer and he knows it's a baby deer, but now they also want him to describe the salient features to clarify that he knows what elements, what are those pieces. Over 2 minutes for something that his siblings did in a second. Think how many times in a day the Griffin's not going to take time to do that, or no one's going to prompt him through it, or no one's going to help him push through his reluctance to do it. This is a lot of work. Children with CBI require mediated, adapted, customized learning opportunities. And that's what his mom and dad were trying to do there. They were trying to mediate that and help him frame in his mind, what he was looking at. But it's hard. This is another example of a lack of a mediated experience. So this is again Jim, and he's at his school, and all week in the spring they were talking about ducks, and read stories about ducks, make ducks out of feathered toys, do all these things about ducks, mobiles, duck everything. This is now Friday of that week. And the kids are given, everybody's, knows we're in duck world now. He's given this little template and asked to trace around it and color it, and it was going to be cut out. Okay. All right. I can comply. He did comply, but was observed. He kept turning and touching the various parts of that little template, that little wooden form. And this is where, of course, the mediation should have taken place. When we notice that he's not really quite sure, but everyone assumes, well, for heaven's sakes, we've been talking about ducks all week. Later, I asked him, I said, what was that you were tracing and coloring in school and cut out? And he really thought about it for a while, and he said, I don't know. His class has been talking about ducks all week, so there was an assumption that exposure to the duck was enough for Jim to interpret the salient defining features of duck. But this would be hard. What's missing here that he probably thought was duck-like? Color, right? The orange beak, the bill, the yellow, or probably yellow feathers, something like that. Color there was nothing really there for him to hang on to. This was no more a duck than it was a map of, Ireland. He had no idea. Okay. So we have to remember not to make assumptions that a child is spontaneously picking up this incidental information. By the way, he probably didn't know that the duck mobiles hanging from the ceiling were the same ones that were worked on when he made a piece of it, because he never got to see the whole thing. All right, play. Let's talk about play. And so we ask ourselves, do well-meaning adults orchestrate the social interactions? See, the zone of proximal development has come back. And we want to make sure that your child, our students, learn to work some things out, and that we help them learn to advocate and have some agency, rather than just creating a fake social parallel experience. Do well-meaning adults design all the play for the perception of success? Okay, so parents always know that, they know who really was driving this bus. If the art activity comes back, or the note in the communication book comes back, and it's a little suspicious, because the parent knows that was probably mostly done by an adult. Do they insert themselves as like another child and just play with? Because remember I said the little girl didn't actually speak to Jim when he knocked down her blocks, because she looked at this one-on-one paraprofessional and thought, this person, there's something about this person who has to be near this child all the time that makes me suspicious. of what I'm supposed to do next. So even if we look at an image like this, where, mom and grandma are close to Jim here, I want to say, and, to be fair, the picture behind that of that little boy, his parent or adult is not very far away from him either. But honestly, sometimes we should check ourselves to see what the physical distance is between ourselves and the child. And if it's safe to be a little further away, try to, set yourself down with a magazine and let them have their time. What also is unfortunate here is that these two adults again, I love these women, but they've kind of preempted Jim's motivation to try to have anything to do with that child behind him. I'm not even sure the adults noticed the other child because they were so focused on him. And there's this lovely family. Aren't they just the greatest? So parents, therapists, teachers, teaching assistants, and support staff need to learn to become quietly available. This should be a class, how to become quietly available, how to learn when to move in and when to step back. In the neonatal intensive care unit, one of the things that we learn from the work of people like Heidi Alls, ALS, who studies the behavior of NICU babies, preemies mostly, teaches us that even brand new babies will do things on their own behalf to stabilize themselves. They are basically seeking out their own competence. We best not take it away from children just because they can't move themselves independently. These parents, therapists, teachers, teaching assistants, support staff need to facilitate, mediate, and frame an experience. This is where previewing comes in. This is where showing a video of what we're about to do next. This is where giving a child some warning that this is we've done this before, but today, instead of using the light box, we're going to put a lamp over and do the art activity that way, helping them connect it to a previous experience. They need to provide verbal descriptions of remote information. This is critical. Just because the child doesn't pay attention to what's happening across the room, please do not assume that the child doesn't care to know. If you watch with great intensity, the face, the body of a child with CVI, and I would say even maybe especially those children who can't talk, using their voice, maybe use AAC, but I see way too many kids who don't have AAC either. Watch if you watch what they notice, there is, joint attention that is not through the eyes. Joint attention, we watch to see what the child's looking at, and then we follow their lead. But we can also follow their body movements. So what's fascinating to me is to watch how, when I'm having this parallel thought here in this space, and there's a child in here, and there's neonatal follow-up going on out in the hall, and a baby's getting weighed right outside this door, so that's always worth a cry. I watch to see what is this person in my room doing? And if they stop, if I see them turn their head, if I see them look up, it's critical that I say to them, let me tell you what's going on out there. It's really important. There was one little girl that I walked her down to the other assessment space with permission from the family, so she could actually see that the baby that was crying was not in danger. She could not really move on past that until I showed her. We have to make sure that the things that happen beyond arm's reach are accessible, and we need to notice it and know that it matters. Don't play for the child, but describe the experience, the children present, and the activity. Give the child time to work it out, and this is huge. This is huge. So one of the things that is most frustrating, I think, to families when I see them is that they often, I think, get a little confused about how little I talk, which probably confuses a lot of people. But when I ask a child something, I wait, and I wait, and I wait, and I wait some more. Because I'm really pretty sure if I've watched that child and I've watched the parent talk to that child, and I see that they're assuming the child understands what they're saying to them, and they do, then I assume the child will understand what I'm saying to them too. And so I need to give the child time to work it out. And even if it doesn't work out well all the time, as long as the child isn't hurt, it's a learning experience. Help the child with CVI understand consequences. That's huge. That's huge. How many children with CVI have experienced disappointment? Disappointment. Now, they may have a lot of personal disappointment for not being included, but I think sometimes we have to help them understand that, you're not always the winner, right? And back off. Remember to back off. So, again, so close to him. The child with CVI deserves the dignity of failure as well as success. And I think we see this best in things like PT, where the PT will let the child try. And even if they stumble, even if they struggle, they want the child to try to work it out. Why? I wonder why we can't do that. Because what does this do? What does failure do for you? Why does this matter? Why do we care? Shouldn't we just give this child the happiest life we can? Well, actually, recovery from failure builds resilience. Recovery from failure builds resilience. So we want these children to be strong in their core. We want them to have self-determination. We want them to be able to advocate and say, that's too visually cluttered, that's too noisy. Well, we have to know that the child has that strength, and they get that from resilience. So there's something about saying, whoops, that didn't work out. Should we try again? That really helps the child know that it's okay if it didn't go well a time. So hopefully the child can predict or participate in non-adult interactions. Wouldn't that be just lovely? Solve simple social problems themselves. Recover from disappointment. And learn to ask questions and advocate for their own needs. One of the most difficult things for children with CVI to do is to identify their feelings. Identifying your feelings is, it's such a remote concept, and it's one that links back to language, right? For kids with CVI. So based on the work of David Warren, we've learned that we talk differently to children with visual impairment. We ask more yes/no questions. We don't wait for an answer very long. We talk about the here and now. We talk more about objects than ideas. We talk about the present, not the past, not the future. And we don't ask for personal contributions. That's what we do. That's what we need to stop doing. So a few weeks ago in an evaluation session, there was a young guy, a really clever guy, who was telling me about an incident in the news that was, occurred, and he could really tell me every detail about it. Really good auditory memory. And when I asked him, well, how do you feel about that? Like, how did that make you feel? Well, it was just about impossible. Just about impossible. And we'll talk about why in a moment. Okay. In fact, I'm looking at the time. So bookmark that. I'm going to make a note. I want to make sure I finish the end of that story, but I want to get to a certain place. So distance viewing is another challenge that creates a barrier to social learning. I talked about this before. Activities that occur beyond our arm's reach can spark curiosity and result in approach behaviors unless you have CVI. They may be missed so consistently. And that's why a lot of students with CVI stay in the known. First of all, it's not novel. And they also have no idea what's going on 10 feet away. So I'll just be here. Children with CVI miss out on a shared social event or experience. This is a really great picture of someone I know with CVI who only under this really special circumstance was she able to see that thing way off in the sky. Some things, it's important to remember that some things move too quickly or are constantly changing. So kids moving around on the playground, it's not really stable enough for the child with CVI to actually even watch, much less participate in. Two, it's just happening too quickly, and the latency and distance viewing make it nearly impossible. Come on. Some things are too novel and too complex to sort out, as we talked about. Some things will not be able to be approached for your inspection at all. Like, I can't ever get close to these animals. I can't ever get close to them because they're going to leave. Something's lost there. Something's lost, right? Kids are talking about animals and they're talking about how they saw a deer in their backyard. Great. Will the child with CVI have that experience? Well, you see how thrilled Griffin was with it, but this, you can't get close enough. They're going to move. They're going to go. Some things are not safe for close inspection. I can't let a child with CVI near this barbed wire fence, much less what's behind it, right? So there's another lost experience that is a shared experience maybe by other kids who can just stand by and watch. And take a child with CVI to the zoo and see how much fun that's not. Because too often, things are too far away and it's really not safe to get down in there and move around with the zoo animals. So it's just lost. Now you can do some things about that. You can use an iPad and video that experience and show it to the child up close. There are ways to accommodate them, but it'll be a different experience. Sometimes the main event is just simply too far away. So one of my all-time favorite pictures of Jim in the car and Stonehenge is out the window. And it's not that any child his age would care about Stonehenge, but the point is there's a lot of rich information out there in the world. And if you only can perceive information within 10 feet, 5 feet, 4 feet from your body, again, that texture of your social life is getting pretty flat. So what does Jim do? He's really engaged in this thing at near. Sometimes when your children with CVI are in the car, think about, especially if you're like in town where you're not moving fast all the time, you have an opportunity to stop at some lights. Think about taking their iPad or their favorite book or whatever it is that they love to look at and just setting it aside for a little bit and say, let's see if we can find some things we know as we drive around town. These unavailable experiences really impact the quality and the quantity of learning and shared social experiences. It creates fewer dimensions, fewer textures on the surface of that child's social experience. I just had to put that in because it's so cute. All right. So safety and danger, we have to remember that field differences, especially lower field losses, can really impact the child's ability to participate in some of these activities. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. That latency is an issue because the child may not perceive the threat until it's too late. So sometimes something like a ball or a moving swing or even a child running is really a threat to the child with CVI. Because of latency, they may not see that person until they encounter them. I sure hope that child's getting O&M. Okay, not every family is going to be comfortable with their child climbing to the top of a volcano, but this is a choice this family made to let him have these experiences. I will tell you, I did not climb to the top of that volcano. Compounding factors include expressive and receptive language difficulties. So we don't really always know what the child's trying to express to us, what they're interested in. Sometimes if there are motor challenges, we just do need adult assistance, right? Maybe that power chair is just not going to work out there in the ball field very well. Maybe it will. Maybe we need an adult nearby. A disproportionate amount of time with direct contact with adults, staging and leading play or social interactions are a compounding factor. Too much time with adults, way too much time with adults, way too much. Parents will sometimes say, my child's kind of like an old soul. They don't really like kids, they like adults. I think we should work on helping them like to be with both. So buddies sometimes have to be facilitated. How do we find a friend? How do we help encourage friendships? It's not always going to happen spontaneously. Sometimes it will. That's a wonderful gift. We want to avoid caretaking the child in favor of a more balanced interaction, right? So don't consider a lack of conflict as a goal. Where we see this the most are children with CVI who have siblings who just don't really let the child get away with it. It's like, no, you can't have this all the time. It's my turn now. Help the child with CVI learn to negotiate differences. And in the beginning, a slightly younger or slightly older child may be a good buddy. We don't want someone who is that second bullet who mothers the child. When a parent says to me, I really like my child's school classroom because all the little girls are just so in love with my child. And, they push him in his wheelchair and they, help him with his lunch. And I just quietly die a little bit inside. It's not that help is not lovely, but what we're looking for is a real peer relationship, not a mini mom, right? So I'm not going to show this one. I think that's enough of that. Remember about positive self-awareness that help the individual recognize their abilities as well as their challenges. This is something I really encourage, that children with CVI know about their CVI. And again, whether they can, easily express their thoughts with you or not, it's very important that the child knows that that you have this vision difference. And the vision difference is called CVI, cortical visual impairment. And it means that your eyes are working pretty well, but the information, once it goes from your eyes into your brain, gets a little bit confused, a little bit, it's not exactly the way other people see it. So there's things we do to help you be successful because of that. Talk to them about when they can't, when Griffin couldn't get on the swing fast enough because of latency, it would be perfectly acceptable to say, in my opinion, to say to him, you know what, Griffin, that is frustrating. And I think if you could see that swing being empty faster than you do, I think that would help. So how are we going to problem solve this? So, but what I want to say is that if you cannot explain the child's visual impairment to them without emotion, don't do it. Because the child will pick up on that so much. And if you are sad and you say, I'm so sad that this is happening, and you're not ready, because the child will perceive that as they did something wrong, as though they did something wrong. They will perceive it as it's a bad thing. Maybe it's not desirable to have CVI, but it also should become an aspect of you and not the defining feature of you, right? So this is Jim telling
I'm
the
so
joke.
sorry, Jim. Can you say it one
I
more
just
time?
have to show this.
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
What do you get if you turn a wow upside down?
Well, I don't know. What do you get?
Mom.
Okay, it really isn't that funny, is it? So, but I want to say that it's very. So you heard some good comparative thought there, right? Picking up on how the word mom could also be the word wow. But the thing he thought was the funniest about that was that mom isn't it's spelled M-U-M in his country, not M-O-M. But cool that he could do that. But again, I like him to tell jokes to his pals. Like, he can tell us jokes, but we shouldn't be the only people. And we shouldn't laugh just to patronize him, right? So it's a really tricky thing. Let's get back to this thing about feelings, because the challenges of empathy and sympathy are a big deal. And they have, I actually did a little very informal survey a number of years ago, and I asked a bunch of parents a question that is not maybe the most pleasant question to ask. And I said, do you think your child's egocentric? And almost to a parent, without hesitation, they said yes. Let's think about why that could be. Mirror neurons are those neurons that fire both when an animal acts and when the animal observes the same action performed by another. Thus, the neuron mirrors the behavior of the other, as though the observer were itself acting. That action that we're seeing is playing out in our brain almost neurologically identically to the person doing it. Those are mirror neurons. I'm mirroring what I see. And it happens mostly through, guess what? vision. So it's primarily in the temporal lobe, and it impacts actions and emotions. So mirror neurons are that way that we get into the thoughts and feelings and experiences of other people. Okay, believe me, empathy challenges are not isolated to children with CVI. That's another issue. But today we're talking about why children with CVI would be at greater risk. So, if I go to the movies and cry when ET is flying to, trying to get home, it's just like the worst movie I ever saw. It's not happening to me. Why am I so sad? Why am I so gut-wrenchingly upset? Because mirror neurons have put me in the emotional position of ET. They have put me in that position, and now I am experiencing what I believe ET is experiencing. The mechanism is activated by the visual system. It's not where it stops, but it's activated by the visual system. And so why do I cringe when I see somebody eating fish? I loathe fish. I'm not eating it, never will, but my mirror neurons put me in that position, right? Mirror neurons are initiated by the visual system, processed in the temporal lobe, and sent to the motor system, where we activate the action and predict the likely routine or outcome. So if you see me pick up a cookie, your mirror neurons will create a scenario of eating a cookie in your mind. You are now playing out this thing I'm about to do, because experience is also feeding it. Vision, experience. Remember the problem with developing visual schemes? What if you never access those rich experiences associated with activities beyond arm's reach or emotion on the face? What happens? And then I have a whole long TED talk about that. We aren't going to watch that right now. So individuals with CVI do not have the opportunity to perceive and pair facial expressions and actions with events. Therefore, the person with CVI is likely to misinterpret or fail to associate an occurrence with an emotional consequence. How many kids do we know with CVI who we think laugh when it's not funny? Somebody falls, the chair bangs, it falls over, and the child with CVI laughs. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they're startled. Maybe they think it's funny. Maybe they think it's scary. But they don't have the benefit of watching this, putting themselves in another position and having it play out for themselves. And therefore, all they have to go on is what happens directly to them. So, going back to my example earlier, when I asked this young man, this really bright young man, and I said to him, so how do you think that person in the news felt about what was happening to him? He was stumped. Then I said, what if that happened to you? Ah, now I have a reference point. Thought about it. And he said, I would be angry. And I said, bingo, I think that's true. So the individual with CVI, and then it went on to say, and the person might recognize this incident, when I said to this young man, I said, so, everybody's afraid of something. And he said, so what are you afraid of, Dr. Roman? I said, zombies. And it's true. I said, I know they're not real, but I look out the window every night just to make sure. So the individual CVI may seem unaffected by emotional reactions of adults and peers, and it's not because they're uncaring. It's because they don't have the same activity occurring that is triggered by vision, reinforced by experience, and literally helps you put yourself in the shoes of someone else. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And so I'm not, this could go on forever. So I'm going to probably stop here, I think, because I should stop and let questions happen. But I think I might have one concluding slide here. Oh, look, this just goes on and on. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop here, though. I really am. I'm going to stop here.
Okay.
Okay.
We support you in that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I'll stop sharing. Okay.